Alright, in the shop today I'm going to show you how to finish the inner lip of that wheel well. A couple of reasons to do that. One, to make it look a little nicer, but also buy just a little extra clearance for some wider tires. So what you start with, in this case, this is El Camino. The inner lip looks like that, okay? So if you were to get kind of close to the tire that is a sharp edge, also just doesn't have a real clean appearance in my perspective. So what I did is I got a little bit of round stock like this. So this is 5/16 round stock, but I did contemplate going with this 3/8 round stock. Both would work reasonably well, but you can see how that 5/16 fits in there reasonably well. And the 3/8 does fit quite well as well, but little heavier, a little harder to bend, so I chose the 5/16. Save just a pinch of weight. A 4-foot section of that 5/16 weighs a pound, and the 4-foot section of the 3/8 weighs a pound and a half, roughly. Okay, so the first step after getting all your supplies is to determine how much of this you're going to cut off. I left about a 3/8 of an inch there, and before I cut that though, I used a hammer, a good quality hammer, and just sort of bent that lip over, okay? The reason I did that is to give it this nice curved appearance. See how instead of just being straight, it's already starting to curve. Now, if you wanted to, you could actually put your round stock underneath there, use it almost as a form. But that said, I just took a big hammer like this before I cut that off, and then I just pounded all the way along there to get a nice gentle curve. And then I sort of tapered it off to the lower part here, okay? Now, when it came to bending the round stock to fit in there, I actually cut it in two pieces. Kind of like when you make a complex panel, it's easier to do that panel sometimes in multiple pieces. I chose the same thing, because if you're going to make that whole bend all the way around there, that's going to take quite a bit of care and accuracy. In this case, you don't have to be quite as good if you cut it in two pieces, and there's no problem. You can just weld that thing together, no big deal. Okay. The other thing is, as you bend it, it doesn't have to be perfect, because you can actually like see how right there it's not perfectly well lined up, but watch this. Vice grips there, that easily comes right into that section. See that? And there was the same thing here. Before I put that vice grip on there, it popped out a little bit. So don't go crazy on getting it perfect. If you get it close enough, use the vice grips to get it in there. Now keep in mind, you do have to prep this metal before welding. It has got that oily coating that most metals have on there, so you'd be better off not welding on that, so using a flap disc or something to clean it off. In addition, after you go and try to coat this later with how I plan to do that, I'll use like some Pour 15 or something, and then I'll use a little seam sealer on there just to keep water from collecting in there. But that's one of the other advantages to using the round stock in there. You might say, why even bother? Just cut that lip off there and call it a day. But this actually provide a little extra structure to that lip, but also prevent a lot of extra space for road debris, water, and stuff to collect. So there's a few reasons in my mind to do that. Now, I'll real quickly just kind of show one other option. So Eastwood does sell something like that. So that attaches to the bolts on the rotor or drum or whatever you have, and that wheel there can actually be used to roll the inner portion of the wheel well. So this modification here Could be avoided if you wanted to save a little time and do something like that. But from my perspective, just rolling that lip isn't going to look as nice. It's not going to be quite as clean. So ultimately on a project like this where I'm trying to make everything look real nice, this is the route I'm taking, okay? But I'll continue to show the progress and we'll see how this turns out, okay? All right, so I'll show that marking and cutting process on this side. So I've gone ahead and marked roughly about 3/8 of an inch there, enough space to be able to get that round stock in there and bend it around to give it a decent curve. Now, I recommend bending first before you cut this all off because it gives you a little more leverage to do the bending on here first. In addition, I recommend making a few cuts along the way here. Otherwise, as you pound, you're actually stretching all of this metal, right? Because it's a curve here. So if you want to bend it in this way, it's going to stretch, and that takes a lot of extra force and actually can distort it quite a bit. So just relieve that tension there by putting a kind of pie-ish cut here, like every several inches, and then that will allow you to be able to do that. Now, if you use a few more of those, you'll be less likely to get little pinches here and there where your curve isn't quite as smooth. So I may actually make a few more of those cuts than I did on the other side. And then I pretty much start to taper it along about 10 inches from there. So however you want to do it is totally fine. That's just how I chose because it actually turned out pretty good on this side, and then it integrates a little bit better into the bottom of the fender there. And there I still have to trim that off, but we'll get this process on this side going. All right, so I've gone ahead and made some horizontal marks here to signify where I'm going to make the vertical cuts. And I'm just cutting down just to that long horizontal line there. And I'm going to be kind of conservative on that because I can always grind it down more later. But that said, I also made a few more of these vertical cuts just to see if that gives me a little bit smoother transition along that curve, okay? All right, so now you can see that I made those vertical cuts there. I'm going to be able to start bending. Now, I used a grinder with a cutoff wheel, which I think is a really good option, but a Sawzall would have worked fine. And for hammer, I mean, you can use body hammer like that, but this is my preference here because I'll be able to focus the energy just a little bit more closely with the rounded portion of this hammer. Now, you got to be a little bit careful because anytime you are focusing more energy on a smaller area, you have a higher chance of kind of distorting an area, making it a little less of a smooth transition from one area to the other. So you got to be a little more careful, but between a combination of that side and this side, a little bit heavier hammer seems to do the trick for an edge like this, which is a little bit thicker than if you were doing a typical body panel, because it's effectively two pieces of 20 gauge metal pinched together. All right, so now I actually have a nice curved lip, and I'm ready to make that horizontal cut along here. And proof that you actually would be stretching that metal if you didn't make those cuts is that those cuts start off just a straight line, and you can see how they kind of become almost like a pie cut there all along the way. And that's because that metal would have been stretching had you not cut those. Now I think that turned out pretty smooth. Looks pretty decent. But to show an alternate way you could actually do this, if you didn't want to do the round stock idea, you could literally just leave it like this and just weld those in, okay? The only reason I didn't do that, because that would actually look pretty decent, is because then you leave this big open space in here for water and debris to collect. So with that round stock in there, and especially after you add some seam sealer and undercoating, it'll be all that area, there'll be no dead space in there, no area for stuff to collect. So that was my thought and reasoning behind doing that. And I also do have to do just a little bit of repair here where there was a bit of rust, but overall looking pretty decent. Ready to move on to the next step. All right, notice as I'm using the hammer and tapping along there, I'm actually not using a ton of force, okay? I'm letting the hammer kind of gently work the metal into the shape that I want. You kind of work your way all the way along and then come back. You don't want to just bend one section exactly the way you want and then move on to the next. It'll actually be a more seamless transition or smoother curve if you do that gently along the way, meaning not a ton of force with the hammer. Just let the hammer kind of do the work, use the weight of the hammer, and you're not actually pounding using a ton of energy from your arm. Just do it as gently as you can to make small changes along the way, and that'll eventually get to where you need it to be. All right, so notice how actually after I cut, I did leave that entire yellow mark, so I didn't cut everything that I wanted off, because now I can come over there with a flap disc or similar and just sort of smooth that area out. So I wanted a little extra metal just to work with. You can always grind more off, but you can't, it's much harder to put it back on once you take it off. So we'll get that cleaned up a little bit, then I'll get my round stock bent into shape, and then we'll get that all welded in. All right, so when it comes to bending this stuff, so again, this is 5/16 round stock. You can just bend it over your leg, which does decent, but if you have something like this meant for bending conduit, it works really great and gives you a little bit more gentle slope or curvature to that bend. Other ways to do that as well and still get that, you can use any kind of round shape you have, an old wheel, or honestly anything that's hard and round you can use to kind of push against and use as a form. Okay, so be creative, but these don't cost very much, and that thing worked honestly really fantastic to do this job.